Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating look at the inner mechanics of transnational corporations, or TNCs. We hear about them literally all the time, right? They're the undeniable giants of the modern economy, shaping everything from the gadgets sitting in our pockets to the cars parked in our driveways. But how much of what we think we know about these massive entities is actually true? Well, we're going to use this visual explainer to cut straight through the noise, look at the real data, and map out exactly how and why these businesses operate across borders. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Global Corporation Myth.
Okay, let's dive right in by tackling those highly sensationalist headlines that paint corporations as these boundaryless empires. Just listen to this quote. Of the 100 largest economies in the world, 51 are corporations. Only 49 are countries. General Motors is now bigger than Denmark. Daimler Chrysler is bigger than Poland. Royal and Dutch Shell is bigger than Pakistan. Now, this is a classic hyper-globalist argument. It presents this striking, almost terrifying imagery of corporations growing so incredibly massive that they are dwarfing entire nation-states, just roaming the globe as these placeless monoliths, wiping out local competition.
It makes for a completely eye-catching headline. Absolutely. No argument there. But I want you to think critically for a second. Does this shocking comparison actually hold any real analytical weight?
Well, the crucial point here is that it actually doesn't. Comparing corporate gross sales to a country's gross domestic product is literally comparing apples to oranges. They are fundamentally different metrics. You see, corporate sales measure total revenue, while a country's GDP measures the value added within that country. So comparing them is a completely superficial and misleading statistic. And worse, it's a statistic that fuels this pervasive myth of the completely placeless or stateless corporation.
Moving on to Section 2. Measuring true transnationality.
So, if sales volume is a totally flawed metric for understanding global power, we need a tool that actually cuts through the hype. And that tool is the Transnationality Index, or TNI. Instead of just looking at raw, flashy sales numbers, the TNI calculates a weighted average of three very specific things. Foreign sales as a percentage of total sales, foreign assets as a percentage of total assets, and foreign employment as a percentage of total employment. The higher the resulting value, the more transnational a firm truly is. The lower the value, the more domestically oriented it is. It's a much more accurate picture.
Take a look at this. In 2012, the average TNI for the top 100 transnational corporations was 67.8. Now sure, that number has grown over the decades, but think about what it actually means. If the average is around 68, it proves that a massive one-third of these giants' activities remain securely anchored right in their home countries. They aren't just floating untethered above the world, they are still heavily tied to their domestic base.
Plus, that whole stereotype of the uniform, gargantuan global firm conquering the world, it's just not the whole picture anymore. Modern globalization is incredibly diverse. We're actually seeing a huge rise in internationally active small and medium-sized enterprises. Today's international economy is basically an ecosystem. It's inhabited by a few giants, sure, but mostly by diverse firms that are deeply embedded in complex global production networks, acting as suppliers, collaborators, or customers.
Section 3. Why firms go global.
Having completely shattered the myth of the stateless monolith, we really have to ask, driven by intense hypercompetition, why do these firms expand across borders in the first place? I mean, private capitalist enterprises are driven by profit, right? And in an environment where advantages are rapidly created and just as rapidly eroded, why take the massive international leap? Well, we can cleanly categorize a firm's motivation for global expansion into two broad buckets: market-seeking and asset-seeking. Pretty much every strategic move on the global board traces back to one of these two foundational drives.
Section 4. Searching for new markets. Let's start with market-seeking. This is essentially a horizontal expansion to serve a specific geographical area. Now look at how this map completely distorts the globe. This isn't a map of population, it's a cartogram based on gross national income. Notice how it dramatically bulges out the USA and Western Europe while shrinking huge landmasses like Africa. For a market-seeking firm, this beautifully visualizes their ultimate target zones. It's not just about how many people live somewhere, it's about their actual purchasing power. So, when firms are eyeing expansion, they're looking at three absolutely crucial attributes of a market. First is size. As we just saw, per capita income dictates the real potential. Second is structure.
As incomes rise in a country, the aggregate demand actually shifts from basic necessities to higher-order goods and services. Income growth is just a massive magnet for foreign investment. And third is accessibility. This means looking closely at transport costs and, crucially, political constraints like trade barriers or tariffs.
Section 5. Hunting for strategic assets.
Let's pivot to that second main motivation, asset seeking. Historically, this basically meant natural resources. You went where the oil, the minerals, or the timber were physically located. But today, it has evolved into hunting for socially created advantages. In our modern global economy, the two most important location-specific factors are socially created: access to knowledge and access to labor. Firms simply must position themselves globally to capture these incredibly valuable resources.
If you look at the darker regions on this map, they represent high enrollment in tertiary education. You see, knowledge and technological innovation tend to cluster geographically. If you're a tech or research firm operating where change is rapid and totally unpredictable, the incentive to locate where the action is becomes overwhelmingly powerful. You are actively hunting for those regions glowing dark on the map, seeking out highly educated knowledge workers.
And that brings us to the exact opposite side of the asset-seeking coin, the cost of labor. Check out the staggering gap in hourly manufacturing compensation here. You've got high-cost regions like Norway and Switzerland way over on the left, contrasted against the undeniable draw of much, much lower hourly wage costs in places like the Philippines or Mexico over on the far right. But finding the right labor isn't as simple as just chasing the absolute cheapest hourly wage. It is a really complex equation. Firms have to constantly balance the knowledge and skills available, the actual wage costs, and the productivity of that labor, meaning what is the actual output per worker. And finally, they also consider labor controllability. Geographically, there are huge differences in unionization and historical labor militancy, and firms often gravitate toward regions where labor is regarded as, well, more malleable.
Finally, Section 6, the path to expansion.
So how exactly does a purely local business transform into a complex transnational network? The conventional view in international business literature outlines a very sequential trajectory. First, you operate entirely domestically. Second, you develop strong, firm-specific assets at home. Think proprietary technology, massive brand recognition, or economies of scale. Third, you transfer those assets across borders to foreign locations within your own organization. And through that process, you evolve into a transnational corporation. Notice the big implicit assumption here, though. Historically, a firm needed substantial domestic bigness and resources before it could ever hope to make that international leap.
But, as we've just seen, the landscape is totally shifting. With small and medium enterprises going global faster than ever before, and production networks becoming increasingly decentralized, that old requirement for massive bigness is fading fast. So I'm going to leave you with this. As technology continues to drastically reshape production costs and uncovers brand new clusters of knowledge around the globe, how will tomorrow's companies redefine the borders of their operations? The map of global business is literally being redrawn right now, and understanding these motivations gives us the blueprint to read it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the global shift.